we're going to spend some time talking a little bit about the history of unions, how unions are evolving, lessons from the labor movement, and then I'd be delighted to take some questions from folks. I will tell you there is this much one can say about the American labor movement, and you are getting it in a very condensed course, so this is not the be-all, end-all, but I think it is a good primer for you all. But I'd like to start by saying, how many people have heard of Friendly's restaurant? Oh, I love it, the fribble, right? See, head nodding. Well, I am not just an authority on the American labor movement. I am also Friendly's Waiter of the Year, 1990, something like that. Yes, that is good. I started off as a soda jerk. I worked my way to scooping ice cream, and I can now scoop ice cream faster than anybody else, something that my two boys absolutely love, the idea that I make the best ice cream cone, and I ended up waiting tables. I love that job. I really did. It was a community of people there. Some were in school, some were like me in high school and early college, some were moms who went back to work, some were folks, this was their job, right? There was a community there on Long Island at Friendly's. We had a manager. The manager was awful. Oftentimes, if he liked you, you got more hours. If he didn't like you, or if you criticized something that he had done or made a suggestion about how we can make the restaurant better, he took your hours away. There were no scheduled breaks on our shifts, and our shifts weren't posted a week in advance so that we could plan. Our shifts were given to us often a day before we were supposed to be working, and you had to show up because if you didn't, you were fired. So we got together one day after a long night of working, and we said, you know, something has to change. And so the next day, we went and spoke to the manager together as a group and said, we have to address these issues. And he did not want to listen at all. So we talked amongst ourselves, and we decided we were going to form a local, an informal local. We called ourselves the Friendly Servers Local, and then we picked our zip code because every local has a number. We don't know how the numbers get assigned, so we decided to be Local 11725 of Comac, New York. And the next day, we all called out sick. And the manager, named Ian, still remember his name all these years, called me and said, what is going on? I said, we are not coming back to work until we get breaks that are on our schedule so that they're scheduled breaks, that our schedules are given to us a week in advance, and that we are guaranteed a minimum amount of hours because we need this job. And none of us were fired. I think they were pretty shocked. I think he was nervous about his own job. We all went back to work and we got everything we asked for. That was my first sort of union organizing experience, but it gives you an idea of what exactly unions do. So why were unions created? The labor movement was created in the United States really just to protect workers who were having a really difficult time at their jobs. It coincided with the rise of new technologies during the 19th century that allowed certain industries to separate the means of production into different stages. And by separating the means of production into separate stages, businesses in certain industries were able to hire laborers who were less skilled in the entire, were not skilled in the production of an entire piece of a single product. So what do I mean by that? Before technology, someone was a dressmaker. And they would go and they would make one dress. And they would be in charge of everything, from the pattern to the cloth, to stitching it all together, to the finishing, and assembled the entire product from start to finish. It was a skill to be able to do all of those things at once. And what ended up happening was technology came and meant that no one person needed to produce that entire dress, that they could divide it up into many jobs with very low-skilled workers who were only adept at doing that one particular thing. So someone dyed the cloth, it's all they did. Someone cut the fabric or made the pattern, that's all they did. Someone stitched everything together, that's all that person did. Somebody put on the finishes, it's all they did. No one person there was capable of making the entire dress. All of those people cost less money than the dressmaker. All of those people with technology made it so that you can make more dresses faster. And the owner of that dressmaking company made a lot of money and higher profits, but the workers saw nothing. The other reason why the labor movement, so people were angry. The other reason why labor unions were created were because the working conditions in which these people, let's stay with the dressmaking theme for a second, worked were awful. Think the Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire, right? Hundreds of young women, many of whom not even teenagers, packed into dark, hot quarters, 15-hour days, no lunch breaks, have to ask permission to go to the bathroom. The doors on the factory are locked, so nobody can leave. They're hostages during the day, and they're not even making enough to provide the basic necessities for their family. Wouldn't you be angry? Wouldn't you want to improve the working conditions, not just your salary, but just the conditions in which you work? That is how the labor movement was created. Those are the conditions to which fuel the creation of this labor movement. So, how have unions reshaped life in America? So we have to remember that by organizing to protect the interests of workers, unions have essentially redefined what work means today in America. So how many people here have ever taken a paid vacation? Thank the labor movement. Because the labor movement was what negotiated those paid time off. How many people ever enjoy a Saturday in the park or a Sunday without having to work? Thank the labor movement, right? Because the labor movement and labor unions were the ones to originally negotiate a day off in addition to the Lord's Day, in addition to Sunday, Saturday off. In other words, and we could go on, we are all the beneficiaries of union organizing despite the fact that today fewer than 10% of Americans belong to unions, which is down from a high of 35% in the middle of the 20th century. So what does this mean in New York? I love these pictures. Samuel Gompers, a Lower East Side resident, a cigar maker, right? And I'm from the Lower East Side, so I take a little bit of privilege and pride in this, became the first president of the American Federation of Labor. And I would say that even though Detroit and Pittsburgh claim to be the bastions of the labor union and really the cradle of the labor movement, I would venture to guess that there is no more labor history per square inch than between Chambers Street here in New York and Union Square. Labor union strength in the Empire State came from a resilience in the manufacturing industry. So if you think about it, right, you had my favorite governor, DeWitt Clinton. Why? He gave us the grid system in New York so that you could arrive on our shores not speaking English and know exactly where to go because of the grid system. Why is he my other, what's the second reason he's my favorite governor? I will tell you, because he lobbied Congress, and when they said no, he figured out how to get the money to build the Erie Canal. And with his ingenuity and 700 Irishmen, they were able to make it so that you can enter New York Harbor, sail north up the Hudson River, and hang a left at Albany through the Erie Canal that takes you all the way to the Great Lakes and open our markets to all of North America, right? Thus us becoming the Empire State. And what gets created after that takes place? Kodak and Xerox and Corning, right? And General Electric. All get developed, big industries get developed. So it's no wonder why when you have these big industries, New York became a hotbed of union organizing, and those factories were organized. We also became very powerful in civil service organizing, and you see that today, continuing here. And now, if you look at New York, you think about what are some of the most powerful unions. You know, you see the Retail Workers Department Store Union, 32BJ, 1199, extremely powerful. They've been able to mix fighting for workers in addition to thinking about politics, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. You see teachers' unions, construction workers, and you see them getting involved in lots of fights, even the ones that don't belong, that have nothing to do with their actual contracts. But I'm here to also say, even as a trade unionist, I don't think unions are perfect. I think there are a lot of problems in unions. And I think, like any industry, we have our bad apples. When I went to 32BJ, I went to 32BJ after Gus Bavona, a legendary, awful labor leader, was kicked out. I mean, it was as bad as you get and as corrupt as you get. So labor leaders, there's an issue sometimes with corruption in unions. I also, when I went to work for a labor union, the Nursing Home Workers Union, when I arrived at the union, some of the staff members came up to me and they said, hey, you're the new guy. And I was like, yes, I'm totally the new guy. They said, yeah, so we're creating a staff union here. And the staff union are going to be made up of every one of us who work for the Nursing Home Workers Union, Local 1115. And I said, that's great. I was a member of a staff union when I worked for the Committee of Interns and Residents, because I believe everybody has the right to organize, including people who work in unions. And so there was an organizing drive that was started at 1115, very quietly. One day, the longtime president of the union tells all of us we have to go to a hotel in Mineola for a conference, like an afternoon conference and an afternoon meeting. So we all go into this ballroom. There's seats just like this, all arranged in the room. We sit down, we take our seats, and we just sit there for 45 minutes. Nobody's speaking to us, but we notice that 5 of our colleagues are not with us. Those 5 colleagues were the ones organizing the union. Well, about 45 minutes later, the president of the union strolls down the aisle that divides us, looks at all of us and says, I know what you're doing, and it's not going to work. Unfortunately, we had to do some layoffs, and these 5 folks are not going to be returning back in your employees, and they fired the organizers. So sometimes, right, and I was devastated, because I thought, here I'm this idealistic guy, I'm in my early 20s, I'm so excited to be working for this union, and the union boss just fired the 5 workers who were trying to start a staff union. And what kind of labor values are those? So these things happen. And in my role as CEO of Educational Alliance, a $50 million community-based organization anchored in the Lower East Side and the East Village, we have 3 collective bargaining units. And I filed an unfair labor practice charge against their union. The largest union, a DC 37 local, 1707, I filed the charge just earlier this year because it's been 2 years since those members were able to get a union representative to go and help them negotiate a contract for themselves. And as a trade unionist, looking at my workers thinking, you're not being respected by your union, that doesn't even seem fair, and I never thought I would have to file an unfair labor practice charge against a union, right? But here I am doing it because they weren't treating their own members well, who are my folks, my staff. And so there are challenges within the labor community, and I thought it was worth it just to talk about today. Also, there's some union setbacks, and we could go through this, but I really just want folks to focus on the darker shading in green on there. Those are all right-to-work states, which essentially means it is really hard to organize a labor union in those states because those states have passed very restrictive laws that make it very difficult to talk to people, to organize folks. And so you can see in the bluish area, slightly colorblind, but really on the coast and a little bit in the Midwest, you can see that's where it's much easier to organize today. And finally, how are unions evolving? I think the fight for workers' rights took a dramatic shift 20 years ago when unions realized that protecting workers' interests goes beyond the conditions on the shop floor. The reality is, if all of you, right, you go into work every day, are you only thinking about work when you're at your desk or at your job? You're thinking about other things happening in your life during that time. Well, union members are no different. And the unions did a really great job, most of them, right, about representing their workers' interests, their members' interests, while they were on the shop floor. But when that worker goes home, even if the worker is well cared for in their contract, what does it matter if they're worried that their relatives are going to be deported? Even if the workers are well cared for in their contract from 9 to 5, what does it matter if their daughter still isn't going to get equal pay because she's a girl? Even if workers were well cared for in their contracts, what's it matter if there are still lax sexual harassment laws in our society? What does it matter to be well cared for in your contract when a black family has to have a conversation with their son about police misconduct and how to act when you're stopped by the police? Unions understood that their members had a life outside of work, and the members understood that their union had a lot of clout, and that clout could be leveraged on the things they cared about, whether it was police misconduct or immigration reform or gender equity or pay equity, right? That the union could be leveraged for things like that. When I was running the state's LGBT civil rights organization, the Empire State Pride Agenda, we sat down as a group of people and we said, how do we win marriage equality in New York? We don't have enough power as LGBT people by ourselves to force the legislature and the governor to pass marriage equality. So we need allies. And when we sat down and thought, who are the most important allies in that fight? Who would we want to be on our team going into that struggle? Who do legislators listen to? People of faith, business leaders, right? Nobody wants to go home in their district and get yelled at by their priest. Nobody wants to go home and be told by the Chamber of Commerce that they're passing bills that are going to lose small businesses money. And labor unions, because labor unions turn people out to vote. And in a democratic state like New York, elected officials listen to what labor unions have to say. So we built a coalition of support within the labor community called Pride in My Union, where unions started, and we started with the Teamsters, which became the first union to endorse marriage equality. And we thought to ourselves, if the Teamsters endorse marriage equality, everybody else has to endorse marriage equality. So we literally went to JFK Airport and would speak at night to the baggage handlers, getting the baggage handlers to sign on for marriage equality and encourage them to talk to their union. And when the Teamsters went to do it, then we went to everybody else and said, dude, vote, support marriage equality, because if the Teamsters are doing it, you guys have to, you're hospital workers, you have to do it, right? And so we ended up getting support. 1 million New Yorkers as part of unions were supporting marriage equality. And then when we held rallies in Albany, we asked the union members to come up with us and they wore their shirts. So there was a legislator who walked into a room thinking that he didn't realize there was a labor rally going on. So he walks into the room and says, oh, I didn't know you guys were up here. What are you guys talking about? And they said, marriage equality. And he saw all the purple shirts of SEIU and he says, you're kidding. And he says, no, we're up here for marriage equality. It gave us like the good housekeeping seal of approval. And more importantly, when the labor unions were going to endorse candidates, we put their, because of intersectionality, right? We put questions about working conditions on Empire State Pride Agenda's candidate questionnaires, and they put questions about marriage equality and our civil rights on their candidate questionnaires. And so it was no longer gay people holding legislators accountable on gay issues, it was labor unions holding them accountable on our issues, and it mattered that they were doing it. And so I think labor unions have become, even though there are fewer people in labor unions, their relevance is actually more important today on many of the issues that we care about, because they have figured out how to spend time talking about things that are not just germane to the working conditions, to the work hours. And you could think about that today in many different ways. Criminal justice reform. You know, I remember 1199 leading the way on Amadou Diallo rally, you know, after he was abused. I think about living wage, the fight for 15, car wash workers, etc. I'm often asked whether or not unions are relevant in the 21st century as there are less and less manufacturing jobs. There's a lot of light manufacturing coming back into New York, and those folks aren't organized. And when I mean light manufacturing, I say like when you go to 7-Eleven or when you go to Starbucks, you pick up those sandwiches that are pre-wrapped or those salads that are already there. They seem to arrive at CVS while everybody's sleeping, and then you can go and just pull them out if you're hungry, right? Those things, they're made by people in New York. Those people aren't organized, so they're ripe for being organized. And you see lots of unions, whether it's 32BJ trying to organize the airport workers or security guards. There are organizing drives that are taking place today. But really, I believe that as long as people believe in dignity at work, as long as people believe that you should be able to have a job where you could put your kid through college, where you could take a vacation once in a while, where you can have an apartment, you could have a little bit of money in the bank, right? As long as people believe that there's a value in that, there is a value in labor unions. Because for sure, there is a generation of Americans who have been better off because of labor unions and because of the contributions they've made, not just to the general society, but also to their wallet and their family. And with that, I'd be delighted to take some questions.